So Esther, let's start with just have you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this area of work.
Sure. I am the CEO and founder of Soul Recovery, which is a program that provides individuals with a clear and comprehensive roadmap to their authentic self by bridging the gap between the 12 steps of recovery and other transformational practices, including some of the latest developments in brain science. What inspired me to get into this work was my own unhealed racial trauma. And I have 35 and a half years of recovery. And I didn't realize until 30 years into my recovery that one of the reasons I continued to default to some destructive patterns was because of racial trauma. I had never related to that before. I didn't know that I had it. But in doing my own practice of soul recovery, I went to the soul. I went as deep as because I had to find out what was this that was keeping me stuck with all of these wonderful years of recovery and so many wonderful things happening in my life. And I was like, wow, that deep core wound of racial trauma. And one day I was doing a soul recovery process, doing some tapping on, and also unhealed racial trauma. What it does is it creates the symptoms, the emotional dysfunction of unworthiness, feelings of not being good enough, and shame. And I processed through all of that in my recovery, but it just, there was this place within me that was stuck. And doing some tapping and working the steps, practicing the 12 steps of recovery, it was revealed, something was revealed through me that wasn't mine. It was intergenerational. It was like a voice from the ancestors that was stuck, that had been stuck in me energetically and on an unconscious level. And when I became aware of that for me, I became aware of, wow, that's what's happening globally. That's what's happening on the planet, is that we're all stuck in this intergenerational, ancestral, familial, underlying root causes of unhealed trauma. So that inspired me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So
Thank you.
that inspired me to get into this work.
Mhm.
And another reason that I was deeply inspired to create my training, Compassion and Accountability, is because of the holistic, metaphysical, deep principles of the 12 steps. I was just able to see clearly that that racial bias is unconscious, that it is an aspect of us that is in the blind spot. And when I looked at recovery professionals, it's like, okay, yes, there is systemic racism in the recovery industry, but it has its origin spiritually and emotionally. And then until we start to address it from that level, we're doing wonderful action-driven work that's necessary and that's powerful. But information without transformation is not sustainable. And the recovery industry is in a recovery moment. And that's what recovery is about acknowledging the symptoms and addressing the symptoms, but that until we address and start to process and release the cause, that we're going to default to what's familiar to us and what we know.
Great. Thank you. So about the services that you provide, why do you think, and you talked about this a little bit, but why the addiction field and recovery fields need this type of training and this type of consultation and services, and what makes your approach to those services unique?
It is so needed in the recovery industry because we are specifically here to save lives. We are specifically here to serve. And if those who are serving are stuck in racial trauma and unconscious racial bias, then energetically, that's what they're leading with. And so again, we are in a recovery moment. The recovery industry is in recovery, is in the first step of recovery, of being powerless and being unmanageable from this perspective. And sometimes unconscious racism, well, racism is a blind spot, right? But it's really outside of our field of awareness, because maybe so many other things are going well in the recovery industry. So this hasn't really been looked at from a spiritual and emotional level. So that is my calling, is to acknowledge all the amazing DEI work that is being done in the industry, but to also invite them to go deeper than they've ever gone before, because you cannot give what you don't have. You can't transmit what you don't have. And so if you're walking around with unhealed racial bias and unhealed racial trauma, not even intentionally, but we know that intent has nothing to do with impact, right? Then we're not going to be as effective to the underserved people the way we've really committed to do.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Esther.
Thank you.
Beautiful.